Hey guys, Pretzelman 945 here. Welcome back to another video and welcome to the second of three updated lists I will be doing this week. Today I'm going to be doing the updated villains list. Because this list is by far the one that was in most dire need of an update because I just um watched that video of mine, which obviously, like, considering my channel wasn't public until January of 2023, all those all those videos would have the same upload date. But I will tell you that that was like among the first videos I made, so it's probably from like 4 to 4.5 years ago, even before I started watching anime. So I think this villains list is by far the most outdated one, and I would not recommend going to watch that video, merely because the list itself is not great. There are some consistencies with my current list, but I think that's only like three characters. Um, so yeah, it was in drastic need of an update. But yeah, we have the top 20 here now, so the list will now commence. And this is in all fiction. It was movies and TV villains last time, but that's because that was all I could really think of at the time. So this list will have a much more varied mix of anime, normal TV shows, movies, and some video game villains. So yeah, starting off the list at number 20 is the Joker. Now, when I refer to the Joker on this list, I am primarily talking about the Dark Knight because that is the main like source of man media in which I have um seen the Joker as a villain. I've also seen the Joker movie, which was okay, and I did really enjoy watching Batman the animated series growing up. I have a good amount of nostalgia for that show. But primarily what I'm referring to here is the Dark Knight for reference, because obviously, like with the Joker being as iconic of a comic book character as he is, there's like a lot of different material that can be taken. So I feel like to clarify, I am specifically for this list referring to the Dark Knight version of the character. Um, because that's the way that I know him best as a villain. And in this movie, there is a reason that Heath Ledger got a goddamn Oscar for this performance because it is absolutely incredible. Um, you want to talk about a villain that that was so effective because they were able to prove a point? That's exactly what the Joker does in The Dark Knight. Because every single point he makes about the truth and corruption of society and the way that that's reflected through Harvey Dent becoming Two-Face and this whole theme of like anyone can become the villain, the fact that his sheer presence in the movie was so effective to pull that off is the primary reason why he's on this list and why he is a legendary class film villain, in my opinion. And number 19 is Davy Jones from Pirates of the Caribbean movies 2 and 3 specifically, those being Dead Man's Chest and New World, I think. Name of third POTC film. What's it called? At World's End. That's what it's called. Okay. Um, so Davy Jones should not be as good of a villain as he is in a movie about pirates, but yet the whole idea around, well, first off, the whole idea around him being like named after, the thing that like one of the most famous pirate terminologies being like, Davy Jones' locker, and the idea that Davy Jones was a real guy and that existed in the bottom of the sea, literally in Davy Jones' locker, is a very creative idea when it comes to exploring pirates. And that alone would be pretty solid. But then there's also like, again, for a movie about fucking pirates, there's like Davy Jones has a shocking amount of like emotional depth because like his whole story is like not the most original because it's the whole thing of like he loved a goddess, and but the goddess did not love him back, and so as a result, um he became kind of like a ghost, like kind of an angry spirit that was like wicked and unsatisfied. um and I think that the like kind of emotional scenes that this leads to with Davy Jones are just like a lot more effective than you would think, and a lot better and more effective than they should be for a movie, again, about gosh dang pirates. Um, so yeah, that's why Davy Jones is number 19 on this list. Number 18 is Vecna. Now, unless Stranger Things season 5 says something different, I will remain convinced that like Vecna is a servant of the Mind Flayer, and that the Mind Flayer was the real like her antagonist all along. But like, I can't tell you how satisfying it was in Stranger Things season 4 to finally be able to like put a face to a name in terms of like a solid villain that like really was essentially the true cause of basically everything that we know has happened with Eleven's character in Stranger Things up to the beginning of season one. Like every single aspect, like, Matthew Modine's character, the doctor was kind of a villain in an aspect, but he was never like, I think it was pretty easy to tell. He was never written to be like the true main villain of the whole show. Um and I think that in terms of like an antagonistic role in Eleven's character, he does that very well. But like it was very satisfying to finally put a face to a name, and I think that this is what season 4 did. I think this is what makes it the best season, is kind of the way that it made it just the it kind of offered a lot of much needed explanation to a lot of events in the story, especially concerning like more of how 11, how this situation came that we even met her in season 1, and the kind of plot twist that Vecna is actually like the number one, like because all the different children had different numbers in the show. The fact that the plot twist that he was number one, and the kind of consistency with that was very satisfying, and just like it was so interesting to me to kind of be able to put again, I'm going to keep reiterating this point, a face to a name, because it was really interesting to hear a lot of the events and plot of the previous seasons of Stranger Things kind of explained through, and like recontextualized through Vecna and the Mind Flayer's motivation overall. And And I think all that combined just made Vecna an absolutely incredible villain. And I think it was like truly the thing that really elevated Stranger Things season four above the other seasons because of just that physical villain aspect being like I can't even say it was a thing that was missing, but it was just an awesome thing that was added onto the already great stuff that season four had already been doing. And number 17, and the first anime villain on this list, is Bondrewd from Made in Abyss. I had to think long and hard about which anime villains I wanted to include, and in fact, the ones I did end up including basically completely changed how I would give an answer for like a Mount Rushmore of anime villains. But to be honest, I'm perfectly fine with that. And to be honest, well, no, I don't think some of these would be swapped out. Besides, that original list I had is quite outdated. So the reason that Bondrewd is on this list is because I'm a big fan of villains that don't appear to be villainous at first and then kind of seem to slowly reveal their intentions, or you can kind of tell that they're probably meant to be a villain, but then like the true depths of their evil gets revealed later. I'm a huge fan of villains like that, and as such, there are several villains like that on this list. Um, it might be the most consistent theme of villain that you'll find within this list of mine. Um, but the reason that I love Bondrewd is because of the fact that in terms of doing what a villain is supposed to do, he does that possibly some of the best out of this entire list because he is literally the only way to get from the fifth layer to the sixth layer of the abyss. Like, there is no other route. His like research base is centered around the only access point, and he is the only one that can let them through to that particular access point. So they are relying they need him to be able to do that. And not only here do we get I'm obviously referring to the events of the movie, but like not only in this movie do we get a ton more scenes and just more contextualization and information overall for Nanachi as a character, more than what we already got with her backstory in the final episode of season one. Um, we got all that stuff, of course, but then we had everything else, such as like kind of like again, I think that this I think similar to Vecna, this is another trope that I really love, where it's like in the movie we kind of get to put a face to a name, so to speak, in that we learn a lot more of Bondrewd's motivations, in that he is mostly just an evil piece of shit who loves doing horrible experiments on people, and that includes his own daughter. And I think what really elevated Bondrewd into this list for me, in terms of one specific factor, is the fact that is kind of the nature of the way that Prushka works as a plot device in this movie, like the way that her and Rico become best friends, but then the way that she ends up dying because of Bondrewd's experiments. Um, and the all the kind of insane trauma and peak storytelling that is just involved with that was amazing. um And yeah, and also the fact that like Bondrew doesn't really even have a clean resolution as a villain either. Like to my knowledge, I don't think yeah. Yeah, so they defeat him in a fight, but he's not dead because of his ability. And they eventually he lets them through because of their strength and whatnot. Mostly Regs, I think. But like the fact that I think that there was the absolute balls to like just not completely get rid of him as a villain just kind of shows how terrifying his threat was to them and potential larger scale of the story as a whole because of the fact that he could have killed them potentially um or decided to be stubborn to the end and not let them through and that would have been the end of their journey and I think all those things combined just make Bondrewd an incredibly effective villain. Now, one critical aspect that a villain needs is pure presence. And I think that one of the best examples of that in this entire list is Kotomine Kirei from the Fate series. Um, Kotomine Kirei is such a fascinating character to me because in both Fate Zero, Unlimited Blade Works, and the Heaven's Feel movies, despite the fact that all three of those animes, despite all being Fate, have completely different plots and have wildly different like interpretations of him as a character, he is still a villain in every one of them. And it just makes his character so interesting and satisfying the multiple different ways that he is experimented with truly. Um because in Fate Zero, I think that his character is a fascinating exploration of kind of the dangers of attraction of power to the gray. And then in Unlimited Blade Works, he seems to be acting like this neutral party that is mad suspicious. Um, and I never believed for a second that he was a neutral party. So when he was revealed as like another secret main villain, um, I wasn't really that surprised. Um, even though, yeah, but but like, considering he doesn't even really last that long, though. Um, uh, I think like the idea of him being a villain and yet a different character across three different Fate animes is just it's so interesting to me. It's so interesting. Such a fascinating and awesome character to me. And then in the Heaven's Feel movies, he is like this he's somehow like a mix between a pure antagonistic force and more of a secret, more ideological, later revealed villain at the end, like in an Unlimited Blade Works. He's like a very strange mix between the two, where he appears to be like an ally to Shiro, but then that doesn't end up becoming true. Um, and the duel that they have in the cave is just insane, and it's insanely cool as well. Um, this character just in concept is so awesome. Um, and number 15, and the main reason, well, one of the main reasons that made Psycho Pass season one as one of the best anime seasons of all time, and and this villain's lack of presence is a severe reason why the other scenes of Psycho Pass were not nearly as good, is because Makishima is just an incredible villain. The kind of mystery to how he was built up to is fascinating, and the dynamic between him and Ogami is even more interesting. Um, because like the cat and mouse dynamics of Kogami constantly catching his plans, and then all the like dialogue from books and scriptures and quotes is just so awesome and like badass, and it leads to just him having a ton of aura in a lot of scenes. And in terms of just pure presence and aura, Makishima is just a fucking awesome villain. Um, and I could definitely say the same thing about the number 14 spot, which is Agent Smith from the Matrix. Um, and of course, he is like this consistent presence throughout all of the Matrix films. And I think the kind of revelation about him being this like what kind of the revelations in the third Matrix movie are um kind of add a lot more interesting context to him as a character, but like that movie also had its issues. So I'm obviously primarily referring to the first one when I say this, but like he is such an effective and yet simple antagonistic force. Um, and the scene where he kind of interrogates Lawrence Fishburne's character, and you kind of learn their motivations is just really interesting to me because like they're kind of just more interesting Terminators. And the Terminators were already a really effective antagonistic force in Terminator the movie, hence what it's freaking named after. But like I think that Agent Smith is just an even better version of that because of the fact that he has a lot more interesting of a motivation, and the way that that scene kind of justifies the world's existence of the Matrix versus the real world. It's so interesting. Agent Smith is an icon of movie villains, and I'm a big favorite of mine. At number 13, and the first of two video game villains on this list, is Sephiroth from Final Fantasy VII. Now, even though I have not played the full story yet, there's quite a few things that I know about the full story, despite the fact that like I've only played Remake and Rebirth and not the full original game, and I'm still waiting on that last like remake part three to come out so I can finish the story. In fact, as you can see, I'm wearing my Rebirth in Orchestra and Concert t-shirt. But that's not related. Um, and lost my train of thought for a second. So the reason that I love Sephiroth is because he is such a like not only does he possibly do the idea of just pure villain presence better than most villains on this list even, definitely one of the absolute best at that easily. Um, but he is also just a incredibly complex character with fascinating motivations, and just exploring his fall was just like so devastatingly tragic because of the sheer insanity that he goes through. Just like a complete and utter fucking mental break was just insane. And and just the sheer like shift in his character combined with the insanely evil presence that he has across the entirety of the game is just incredible. And that's why Sephiroth is a peak fucking villain. 12 is Palpatine, aka Darth Sidious, aka the Emperor. And there's not really a whole lot that I can say on this one. Palpatine is one of the most iconic um villains in all of cinema, along with Vader for a goddamn reason, for very different reasons. Because Vader's further up on this list. Um, uh, just like he is pure evil in um possibly the best way ever. Not the absolute best way because I think that there's one or two more villains that do that slightly better, but like he does that at like some of the best in all of fiction. And if you're including Legends content, then the Darth Plagueis book explores a lot into Palpatine's character and kind of seeing how certain actions of his in the movies can be connected to like formations of beliefs through training with Darth Plagueis as a young adult and through early childhood are just really really interesting and kind of expand his character a lot more. But even if we're not including Legends content, which is a perfectly fair conclusion to come to, like even if you're only talking about content from the movies, his entire plan is just genius. And again, I don't know that much I can say about Palpatine because, like, he's just one of the most iconic evil villains in all of cinema. Um, at number 11, and some people may argue that he is not actually a villain, but in terms of picking a main villain from Attack on Titan, I think this is the best choice. At number 11 spot, I have Zeke Yeager. And that's because he is the primary antagonistic force throughout um basically all of the first to third seasons and a good amount of the fourth season. Um to be real. So, that's why I'm mostly including him here. Um because of the fact that he is the leader of all the Titans. But like Zeke's character is so fascinating to me because it's so interesting. Like, I think that there is no other character that better reflect the kind of themes that Attack on Titan goes for of like, the difference between races and equality and that sort of thing in terms of like Eldians and Marley. Better than Zeke in terms of like the way that his backstory is explored and the way that it can connect back to other things that he said in previous seasons. And I think that like Zeke is also just possibly the most perfect example of every single plot strength of Attack on Titan put into character writing because of the fact that there is so much revealed about them and even more mysteries created with foreshadowing that leads to other reveals later on. And then those reveals kind of connect back to other things that he says, or you can understand better about things that were like mysteries created in earlier seasons. And I think that Zeke is that like all these strengths of Attack on Titan, I think that they are done best and represented best character wise in terms of Zeke's character. Um, well, number 10 is John Kreese, and John Kreese is such a complicated character. Um, because, he starts out in the original Karate Kid movies as like this war veteran, evil karate teacher. He's much more of a traditional bad guy. And he's entertaining enough for his purpose in that role. And then we meet him in Cobra Kai again, and he is a completely broken man. Because of the fact that, like, he's living in homeless shelters. He made up everything. He lied a ton about his past. And then he seemed to, like, gain a ton of, he seemed to, like, regain a ton of motivation as um, and vigor, it seems like. Because of like the way he just goes full villain and like takes Johnny out of Cobra Kai, becomes the head of the dojo, um, and and then like the way that he kind of manipulates Silver, and then the kind of back and forth counter upping the manipulation game between the two of them, all while we also get to see a flashback of Priest in the Vietnam War, and I feel like there's a lot more that we learned about his character, which is really cool. Um, uh, like all that's going on at the same time, right? And they're constantly getting the one up on each other across seasons 4 and 5, and across seasons 4 and 5. Silver kind of, um, it's really interesting their relationship, uh, Harry Silver and Priest, because of the fact, because of like the counter relationship, like um, Grease seems to reawaken the beat in Silver, and Silver seems to do the same thing to Kreese, but it leads to Kreese actually ending up completely reforming as a character and just like repairing his relationship with Johnny in one of the best acted scenes in any TV show I've ever seen. Like that kind of hugging scene between the two of them. Um, where Kreese just realizes all of his failures, and then the way that him and Silver go out in a fight to the death as they both die on an exploding boat was just absolute fucking cinema. That's truly the only way to describe it, in my opinion. And just the entire journey that Kreese's character goes on is so fantastically complex, and there is so much different nuance, and I just think that his whole character arc is incredible. Speaking of incredible character arcs, of course, the previously mentioned Darth Vader is the number 9 spot on this list. Um, And again, I don't really know what I could necessarily say about Vader that hasn't already been said. Because again, this is another fantastic example of where if you take Legends into account and with the books and the comics and stuff like that, then you get so much more interesting lore and character to Vader. But even if you just take his character arcs in the movies, which is brilliant in itself, I admit, as I've talked about on this channel, I do have my issues with the fact that I feel that certain parts of Anakin's Fall to the Dark Side are rushed when you consider just the movies, but when you add in like the TV show and stuff like that, then it becomes I can see why everyone considers it peak. Um, if it's just movies alone, like I've said before, I do have some issues with it, but like I like to call this considering all the canon material, so I would include Clone Wars in that. Um, when I say that, and obviously his character, his redemption arc is like, I mean, he's like one of the most iconic villains in all of cinema, if not all of fiction. Um, I don't feel like there's a lot more I need to say. And number eight is Aizen. Aizen is probably the best pure evil villain on this entire list because from the moment that he is revealed as a traitor, he is just pure evil from start to finish, and it is just glorious. Now, normally I think that simply pure evil villains can be not as can still be really good, but just not as interesting as other characters that are more complex. For examples on this list like Kreese and Sephiroth. But Aizen, in my opinion, is the ultimate example of how to just do a pure evil villain and make that villain have a fuck ton of aura and a fuck ton of evilness, and that's the only thing that they need. And Aizen is so effective in that, in every single moment that he's in terms of being a crucial plot device. And anyone that says, obviously not talking about either Ginjo or Yulba in this list, but like anyone that says that Bleach does not have the best villains out of the big three, they're fucking insane. Because Aizen, in my opinion, despite the fact that Bleach has other really good villains, Aizen is enough to say that Bleach has the best villains out of the big three without even including any other villains besides Aizen. Um, because in my opinion, there is no other villain in across all of the big three that even comes close to touching Aizen's quality as a villain because he just has so much fucking aura and evilness, and the way that he seems to serve as a crucial stop at every single point in the story only makes him even more effective as that traditional antagonist and villain role. And that's why he's so high on this list. And number seven is God. Gus is such an interesting villain to me because of the fact that he is not as evil in the main villain sense of the downfall or character wise as Walter White, or even you could say as Saul Goodman. He's not even as pure evil as someone like Lalo Salamanca, but the fact that he's kind of this really interesting hybrid of all of those elements, it just makes his character so interesting to me because he obviously has his background with Hector Salamanca, and we get to see his backstory, and and that moment when he finally gets revenge is so satisfying. But just kind of, there's that aspect as well, but there's also that kind of pure evil aura element where um despite the fact it's not nearly as much as Eisen. And like I said before, I think Eisen kind of clears that, even compared to any other character on this list. Um, uh, Gus is so interesting because he definitely does have a lot of presence and evil aura in the way that he is such a cautious, like, businessman, and the way that he runs his empire, and the fact that realistically, his entire empire didn't really follow any particular mistake of his own accord. Like, the only mistake that he sort of made was the fact that he kind of became a bit too hell-bent on revenge in the end, and but there was no way that he reasonably could have predicted that, like, Walter and Hector would team up to kind of trap him like that. So in my opinion, it's not really through any mistake of his own, which just kind of goes to show his sheer cunning and genius. And I think all those that mix together make Gus a fantastic villain and easily my favorite character in Breaking Bad. Uh, oh my gosh, this is gonna be such a long video. We're already at 41 minutes and we still have the top six to go. Okay. Um, And number six is Grand Admiral Thrawn. Grand Admiral Thrawn has dropped several spots in this list, being completely transparent. Um, he used to be my number two. He was my number two for many years, but that does not change the fact that I think Thrawn is an incredible villain and one of my favorite Star Wars characters. Um, I'd say probably like my third favorite Star Wars character to be realistic because I have mixed feelings about Rebels. I think it's a pretty good show, but it does have issues. But the best part of it by far is Thrawn. By far. Um, and I will include, I have not read the Thrawn trilogy. I've only read Heir to the Empire. So, in terms of including that material, I can only speak on Heir to the Empire because I have not read the full trilogy. But like, I know how well regarded that series by Timothy Zahn is, and also his kind of contributions to Legends. And I need to thank Timothy Zahn for even creating the character of Thrawn in the first place. If Timothy Zahn had not written those books, then the greatness of Thrawn as a villain would not even exist. Um, so I will reference a little bit of that, but mostly my experience when talking about this is from Rebels. And Thrawn, I think, does this nature of being the cold calculating genius probably the best on this entire list because of the fact that he studies he studies a culture's art to figure out a military weakness. And you just can't get more interesting of like an exploration of how his of how a villain's brain works than that, in my opinion. Because like what other villain is gonna do that, much less an imperial commander of all things? Um and I think that that combination is just it's so fascinating to me. And the way that he uses all of these seemingly like incredibly irrelevant and baseless details to come up with the most genius plans is just it makes it so satisfying to see every single moment of his cunning and genius on screen. Um, and that is why Thrawn is one of my favorite Star Wars characters and also one of my favorite villains. Um, at number five, and uh, my favorite character from Berserk, and one of my favorite characters in all of fiction now. At number five is Griffith. Um, and I kind of mentioned when I was doing the updated fiction list yesterday that I think that yeah, sorry. Bit of a break. That I think that him and Guts have the best rivalry dynamic in all of fiction. I still am going to make that list, but I'll tell you already as a spoiler for that list, Guts Griffith dynamic rival, whatever you want to call it, is number one on that list by far. It's not even close. Um, because the way that they start out as friends and kind of Griffith seems to have this like glorious presence to him. And he has all of these grand ambitions, so much that like to kind of borrow from a description of Griffith I've heard in the past, he kind of feels his ambitions almost feel too grand for the story of Berserk itself. And to have a character like that is so fascinating. Um And Griffith's quote about dreams and like the one who can be my friend is my equal, and that being Griffith's dreams might be my favorite quote in all of fiction, to be completely honest. I don't even know if I can make that list, but that is probably my favorite quote in fiction. Because it just and it's honestly my favorite panel in all of manga too, in Berserk Volume 6. Um, but I absolutely fucking adore that entire the entire aspect of his character and just the whole idea of a character that has such grand ambitions that seem too grand for the story itself to kind of um and to kind of see those explored. And the fact that Griffith ultimately feels like the greatest example in all of fiction, in my opinion, of the trope like you either live long enough, you either die a hero or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain. Because that's exactly what Griffith's ambitions are. He has ambition. He is a hero in terms of like he saves tons of people. He gets very high up. He's well loved by the people. He's a genius military commander who's loved by all of his troops. Um, but then he goes further than that, and he causes the eclipse, and he becomes the villain. Um, and everything about also the way that his relationship evolves with Guts, from being truly best friends because of the fact that Guts was the only one that Griffith ever regarded as the closest thing to his true equal. Um, to kind of see that relationship just collapse is fascinating, and it's again the best dynamic in all of fiction. And I think all of those elements, and I think Griffith being the ultimate example of that kind of trope, would be or not would be, is the best of that in all of fiction, as such one of the best villains in all of fiction. Now, at number four, um, and the and my favorite video game villain, and it's not even close, is Valkorion from Star Wars: The Old Republic. Now, what makes Valkorion one of the best villains of all time is his presence. And I know I said that Eisen did that the best in the entire list. I lied. Eisen is number two, but in my mind, Valkorion, when I really think about it, he is the true number one because across every aspect of the story of Knights of the Fallen Empire and Knights of the Eternal Throne. He is this looming presence in the Outlander's character where, you know, he affects the choices you make. You can rely on his power or not, and both of those decisions in every situation which it comes up completely changes the story and how it plays out. And kind of the way that, like, even when he dies and he's killed by Arkin, and Arkin becomes the Emperor, who is another fantastic character, an antagonist in his own right, to be frank. Um, to kind of see him sort of disappear, um, and kind of like after that whole final fight with Arkin, he seem it seems like he takes a more um a more back role of the story until you get to, I'm pretty sure it's chapter 13, where you need to go into the cave, and you're kind of like guided by Valkorion, and he seems like really fucking pissed off. And it's so interesting because, like, that moment in particular is like the first time that he pops up in a long while. And it's such a different and yet interesting exploration of his character, because of how much you seemingly learn about him, all the while doing that trial for Secure John and Darth Maul. Um, and then and then that happens, and at least when I was playing through with it, I didn't think much of Valkorion until the very end of the story, where he kind of reveals himself to be the actual true ultimate villain all along. Like, he, even though he was dead, he was essentially I can't talk, manipulating Valen. Witcher was the name of the sister who becomes empress. I could be wrong about that. And let me just look it up real quick because why the fuck not? This video's already been long enough. Gonna work mouse. There we go. Okay. Done her. Valen. Yes, yes. Her name is Valen indeed. Um, and Valen, I think, also serves as a great antagonistic threat, and when you defeat her, it feels so satisfying. But no, that is not the end of the story because you end up going to um the main planet where he did all his experiments on Valen, where he originated truly. Um and that's the other thing is, like, when you take into consideration the fact that he is also the same character that ruled the Sith Empire for 1,000 years, and all of his backstory on Madrius, um, and everything that you learn about that is just it truly makes like, I think that this top four is like, even compared to the already legendary quality of villains that we've talked about so far, this, like, top four is truly like on another pedestal above that. Um, I can't sit cross-legged. I love this chair. I got a new chair a few days ago, as I'm sure I've mentioned a lot in recent videos, and I absolutely love it. Um, At number three, and by far the most recent entry in this list in terms of like me completing the work that this villain is from. And number three is Friend from 20th Century Boys. Now, I talked a lot about how in my top 10 updated pieces of fiction video that I did yesterday, I talked a lot about how 20th Century Boys. I'm pretty sure I mentioned this a fair amount when it came to Friend as a villain too, but like, um, I'm going to talk about it more in depth here because I believe that 20th Century Boys is Urasawa's magnum opus, and I think that this also applies in terms of the way that he wrote his villains because, um, I think that Friend is, this ultimate combination of like a geniusly built up mystery in terms of like who he is um and um and um and just the way that he like became the way that he did. Every single aspect of his character that's explored, from the way that you learn all about it in Fukube and how that makes sense, and even like when we're exploring the mystery of who is the second friend after Fukube dies, um then there's also so much more that you learn about him as a character as well, which just makes him an even better villain, in my opinion. Um, so yeah, that's why Friend is number three. Now, despite the fact that I said that Friend, I think, is the magnum opus and culmination of all the best things that Urasawa wrote in a villain, despite that, and this might be very contradictory, but um, number two is Johan. Despite all that I said, I cannot bring myself to rank Johann below Friend. Just because I think that while Friend is the ultimate combination of the Friend is the ultimate combination of the all the best parts of Urasawa's villain writing. I think that Johann is an even better job done of like focusing on one aspect of Urasawa's brilliant villain writing. And what that aspect is specifically is making an incredibly complex character that um is just and making an incredibly complex character that is um that is just like making an incredible like oh man, this has been a long video. We're at an hour. Oh, oh man. Um okay, can you finish get this. I don't think the protagonist video will be this long. um I think that Johann is the best part of making the most complex character and like only focusing on that aspect instead of more on the creating mystery side necessarily and the kind of mystery to his reveal, even though there's a lot of that with Johann's character, don't get me wrong. But I think that Johan is just ever so slightly better. It's so close between the two. Honestly, on a different day, I might put Friend above Johan, but as of today, uh, 1 hour into this video officially, I say that Johan is just slightly better. Um, and that's because he has this evil haunting presence where you learn a lot more about him as the story unfolds in a very similar way to Friend. It's just like it's a staple of Urasawa brilliant villain writing. The fact that the plot reveals more about the villain. Um, because like you hear in the background of all these different events and all these evil characters that eventually in some way or another end up connected to Johan, or you see Johan directly doing all of these actions. um and kind of the dynamic between him seeming like constantly elusive to um being being like just chased after by Tenma constantly is just it is incredible. And just seeing him like at a lot of points just seemingly random out of the blue, like in Prague in the library scene around episode 39 to 40, which I truly believe is the absolute peak of Monster the Show. Like the best episodes in the entirety of the show are around that point. um and the fact that Johann is like what makes the mystery around Johann so compelling is this idea that no one really knows who he is. The fact that he can't seem to get clear information on who he actually is, and uh, and like also the fact that he seems to just embody this. He, like it just seems to make him all the more mysterious and cool, and yet horrifying at the same time. And then the way that the genius ending of the show, which is left completely ambiguous in the fact that Johann's true, like, real family name is never actually revealed, and it kind of leaves this ambiguous ending to the monster, and Johann could truly be anybody. And I think that when you combine all of that with all the other insane character things that you learn about Kinderheim 511 and Johann as a character, it just makes it's like just enough of like a better character concept for me to say today that Johann is just ever so slightly ahead of Friend. But neither of them can quite compare. They come very close, but they can't quite compare to my number one villain in all of fiction, which has remained unchanged for the past 7 years, ever since I first saw Infinity War in theaters, and that is Thanos. Um, Thanos is one of my favorite characters in all of fiction. Um, by far my favorite Marvel character. That is not even close. I think that Thanos is just a perfect amalgamation of what I love in every single villain. In that, the true depths of his evil are revealed later in the movie. I think that, like, what makes one of the thousand reasons that Infinity War is the best movie of all time is the fact that um like every other character is already established. To kind of borrow the words of one of my favorite film critic channel that talked about Thanos in a recent video. It's like all the other characters are established. So Infinity War as a movie can fully explore Thanos to the fullest and just really dig in and understand every aspect of his motivation. Um, um, and also he's just a total badass because um when he is using the stones, he is this pure genius, and he's just this hulking giant whose presence, he has that aspect to his brilliant presence. Not the best on this entire list. I still think that goes to Valkyrian specifically, but um he has an incredible presence across the entirety of both Infinity War and Endgame as this just consistent looming threat. And all the while, you're exploring him as a character, and his motivations make complete sense, even though they are very evil. Um, so he also has that aspect checked off as well. And, he's also a dynamic villain in that in Endgame, his goals change. And to kind of see the comparison between the two versions of Thanos is so interesting because, one is so dead set versus the Thanos that we see in Endgame seems to believe that his other counterpart would have made a mistake in the current plan. And even though it's not much of a change, it is enough for me to consider it a pretty significant character change where he ends up just deciding to want to annihilate the entire universe instead of just half of all life because clearly life in this universe would not be suitable to exist even if we start with his merciful thing or whatever. Um and I think it's just I just think that all those combined make Thanos the best villain in fiction. And I'm going to stop this video now because my mouth is so tired and I need some fucking water. But yeah, if you made it all the way through this very, very long video, thank you so much for watching. Let me know who your favorite villains of all time are in the comments below, and I will see you later. Bye bye.